Welcome to Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. I'm your host, Dean Anderson, and this is a show about addiction in our community and substance use disorder and all things about it. And today on our show, we have Christa Royal, and Christa is, she's got a long list of things that she's on the show for today. She's a yoga instructor that does recovery-based 12 YSR, and she's a compassionate inquiry practitioner, and she has lived experience, and she's legally blind. So she's here to talk about some of the disabilities and how it impacts substance use. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. So I want to just ask you right out of the gates, and we have a limited amount of time, and I know that you have a plethora of information to share. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about very specifically your being legally blind and the disability that comes along with that, and how it impacts substance use and how it impacted your personal addiction. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
So first I'll say is that I have retinitis pigmentosa,
Okay.
which affects the rods and cones, and more so like my peripheral vision, and it causes night blindness and eventually will lead to blindness.
Okay.
And so it's kind of been one of those interesting things where I can actually see, but I can't do a lot of things that everybody else can do.
Okay.
And so what was the question again about?
Yeah, how does that play a role in your substance use disorder? There's so many nuancy things when it comes to substance use disorder, and most people recognize it just as, you know, here's a person that doesn't know how to deal with life and they're drinking. And the reality of it is there's all these layers, and I want to peel off the layer of understanding what it means to have a disability and a substance use disorder, and how they kind of coexist.
Okay, so when I look back, addiction for me started earlier in life, like very young. But when it really picked up was when I turned 16 and I was told that I was never going to be able to drive. So right away, as soon as I was told that I was never going to be able to drive, I was like, whatever. What's the point? What can I do? I lived in a teeny tiny small town. There was like zero opportunity. And all my friends were going off and doing all their things and having all this excitement with their driver's license. And I just jumped into drinking, right? Like that's what I did. It sucked. It was, it just really was difficult. Right? It was difficult to figure out who I was. It was difficult to get up every morning and say, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. And so instead I just was like, you know what? I dove into drinking. I was the drinking buddy. I went with everybody, everywhere that they went. And so here I am doing everything that everybody else wants to do and never doing anything that I wanted to do. And it kind of continued throughout my whole life. And it was really, what's the word? Like suffocating? Is that the word I'm looking for? Suffocating. It made me feel small. Yeah.
So I'm hearing you say that there was a feeling of lack of inclusion, and the alcohol helped you to stay connected?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Well, yeah, because if not, I would just sit at home by myself. So I just went and did what everybody else did. And unfortunately, I probably chose, not the people who were going to acting classes or who were going to do this or that. I chose the people that were going out for gravel runs. I lived in a small town. So I was like, okay, let's go do this. And it always included alcohol. Always included alcohol. And, I look back and I think, wow, if I had just made one different choice, then I wouldn't have had so many years of drinking and isolation, basically is what happened. So then the drinking led to isolation because I didn't know where to go or what to do.
Are there any other, so when I work with clients, one of the things I try to do is I try to determine what needs are being fulfilled by the substance use. And it's very clear that people go, oh, I'm using it, but they don't even recognize how it's fulfilling a need, basic human needs sometimes, social needs, emotional needs, sort of like. What would you consider were the needs that were being fulfilled by the alcohol?
Depression.
Okay.
Just pure depression, right?
Okay.
Like imagine getting up every day and never being able to do what you want to do. you have to do what everybody else is doing. You never get choice.
Right.
There was, depression was a big thing. Anger, a lot of anger, and deep sadness. A sadness.
So a lot of emotional numbing. Yeah. I can see from myself and my own experience struggling from FOMO. For those that don't know what that means, it's fear of missing out. But that FOMO is a real thing. It's the fear of inclusion or abandonment or being left out and not being participating in that. I could only imagine what it would be like of having that and then having more physical limitations on what you can and can't do.
Absolutely. So when you say that, absolutely. I still to this day have those experiences of that FOMO. And it brings up that anxiety, and it takes me right back to when it all started. Even though I've done so much work, it's still in there. It's still that fear of missing out, and sitting at home going, what's that person doing? What's this person doing? Why can't I go do that, right? And then it's like you think about, oh yeah, I want to go and do this, but then there's 10 million steps to get there. Whereas for a lot of other people, and I'm not saying it's just me, but then there's a lot of other people, it might be just 1, 2, 3 steps, and they're like, okay, I'm there. But there's so many more things to think about when you have a visual impairment. Nothing is easy. Going for walks is easy, but everything is a challenge. Everything.
What would you say would be a barrier that is in your life that most people overlook or don't think about? And someone's like, hey, let's go do this. And you're like, what about? And people are like, oh, I never thought of that.
Well, definitely driving. By choice, I live in a small town. Accessibility is zero. Living in a small town. We don't even have a running cab. It's not running. We have services, but everything has to be, there's no spontaneity. That's the biggest thing. There's no spontaneity whatsoever. Okay. I think I said to my dad one time, I said, I'm an extremely spontaneous person living in a world that is not. I live in this little incredibly spontaneous person who's forced to live in the confines of my disability.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
There's something that I recognize with a lot of people is there's a need for certainty, there's a need for structure, but there's also a need for uncertainty. There's a need for that spontaneity. It's part of and so this is another one of those needs I was talking about that need to be fulfilled in order for us to do that. And I see it with people in substance use disorders quite regularly where they don't find that spontaneity, they don't find it, then they end up relapsing because they're seeking chaos, they're seeking that spontaneity.
It was something to look forward to.
Right.
That was the biggest thing when I was in the deepest of my addiction, that it was something to look forward to. So when you don't have that, I can get up and I can plan this to go do this, 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 and this today. You wake up with this amazing plan, all these things going through your head, and none of them are really doable. And you're like, well, okay, I guess I'll look forward to having my drinks this afternoon. Yeah. Right? So it was something to look forward to.
Yeah. Yeah. What about now? Is there ways that you're able to find that spontaneity, or is there things that you do now to kind of embrace? So I recognize from my own life that I had lots of spontaneity in my past, and now I do things that are a little more off the cuff. I'll go into a restaurant and have the server pick my meal for me, right? Just to add a little bit of, well, I don't know what's going to show up, Are there any things that you do to kind of soothe that now, or things that you do to fulfill that need?
I think that I've created for myself a life where I am happily accepting what is right in front of me. So there isn't that need to have that, that absolute spontaneous stuff happening. So I find happiness in the small things. So for instance, my niece took me to the beach one time. She goes, I have never seen anybody so happy just to put their toes in the water. I'm like, it's been 2 years since I've been here. Of course I'm happy to put my toes in the water.
Yeah.
Right? So it's those little things like finding, like talking about your dinner. When the dinner comes, if I have the French fries are cooked to perfection, I'm like, this is amazing. This is like the best day ever. Yeah. I mean, it sounds so silly, but with that mindset, instead of thinking that I'm missing out on a bunch of stuff, and being very accepting and appreciative of every little thing that's right in front of me, my whole life has changed.
Nice, nice. Gratitude is a major component of addiction recovery, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and stopping the constantly seeking and thinking that I'm missing out on something and that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
In this exact moment. It might not be the most, it might not be the most amazing thing, and I may want to think that I want to be somewhere else, but no, I'm just really appreciative of exactly where I am in this moment, even if it's chaos. Even if it's, I was going to say not fun, but it's still okay. Yeah.
Right. So comparison is the thief of joy. Right.
Like, try to get that out of your brain.
Yeah. So
That took a long time.
I want to segue into how this has, because I'm hearing acceptance, I'm hearing gratitude, I'm hearing even maybe a sense of, I can sense some spirituality and some of that. So how does the 12 steps of yoga recovery play into this? Like, how does yoga fit into your life now?
Well, yoga 12-step recovery came after the actual yoga training.
Okay.
Just one day, I was just guided. Like, you ever just wake up and you're like, this is what I need to do today. And the next thing you know, I'm booking my yoga training and I'm heading off to Jamaica with some strangers to do my training. And I wasn't even really all that into yoga at the time, but I just knew that that's the path. That's where I needed to go. And it changed everything.
Awesome.
It changed everything. That's where I learned that I am perfect exactly as I am. I don't need to be anything different. And I am who I am, and this is exactly who I am, and I don't need to change anything about me to be fully accepted. And it allowed me to connect in with my spirit, and with the spirituality. It allowed me to connect in to what was inside. Because really that's where the fear was, right? I fear of missing out. I wasn't missing out on anything. I was resisting to connect in with myself. And that's where addiction came in so heavily. Is because I was trying to run away from myself and not just be right here with me. So movement and acceptance and connecting in with a power greater than myself allowed me to be here and to be present. And I mean, I say that like it just happened overnight. It didn't. It was years. It was years and years and years of working on me and being okay with me.
Amazing. I appreciate all of that. I hear a lot about the dichotomy or the separation of self, being two different things, what I want to be and what I know I am and what I feel like I am, and that disconnection creates a disconnection of self, not just a good disconnection of people. And if you got a disconnection of yourself and a disconnection with people, holy moly, do I need to self-medicate, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So to bring this to a close, I know we could talk for a long time about all this stuff. If you could give one quick piece of advice to people with visual impairments or blindness, what would it be with substance use?
Well, accessibility is difficult and it's always hard to get there. So call somebody, reach out to anybody and ask for help. That's what I forgot to do.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the show. Our next segment actually has two guests. Very happy to welcome Melissa Brideau, who is a Master's of Social Work, PhD candidate at the University of Western Ontario, an author, and with her, we have her service dog, Freya. Well, welcome to the show, Melissa.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here to talk about an issue that's very near and dear to my heart.
Oh, my heart's singing already just hearing your passion about it. Welcome, Freya, too. Freya's going to sit here and be patient and have some treats and participate in the show, which is great to have. I want to talk about recently you've participated in authoring or helping to contribute to a textbook responding to the oppression of addiction. Is that?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I get the title right.
So I have a chapter in there with Rick Cernick, Dr. Rick Cernick.
Yeah.
And basically we talk about the barriers that are present for people with disabilities contending with addiction issues. So we look at things like attitudinal barriers, the negative public and professional perceptions of people with addiction issues and coexisting disabilities. Mm-hmm. We look at systemic barriers, so things like policies and procedures that may inhibit someone's ability to participate in treatment. Mm-hmm. And then we look at environmental barriers, so the things that are in a person's immediate environment that inhibit their participation.
That's a lot. Mm-hmm. We could talk for a long time about all of those things. So for those that don't know, Dr. Professor Rick Cernick has been a guest on the show a couple of times here, and we've talked to him, and he's a plethora of information. So being asked to participate in that way must have been flattering.
It was wonderful. Actually life-changing, for sure.
Wow, that's big, for sure.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned attitudinal barriers, and we had a brief conversation the other day, and you had brought up attitudinal barriers, and for most people wouldn't understand what that means. Can you give a little bit of a depth of, a broad stroke of what attitudinal barriers are?
Yeah, so I'm going to give an example.
Okay.
So when we think of someone who's visually impaired or visually challenged and trying to obtain treatment, they may be hesitant to disclose a substance use issue because doing so may make it so that they're ineligible for other services or supports that are integral to their well-being.
Wow, that's fascinating. So the previous guest on the show was legally blind, and she was talking about some of the barriers that she would have. And we've had other guests on the show talk about not wanting to disclose because they're parents and they're worried about what might happen to their children and those sort of things. This is something that most people wouldn't look at because most people with disabilities have a really, really serious dependency on what the system is providing. And
And if you look at systemic barriers, there's things like if you hand out pamphlets and somebody's visually challenged, how does that work? Are they offered in different formats? Or if someone is deaf, it's really difficult because currently there are no formalized substance use screeners for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So it's really hard to obtain where they're at in their addiction because of those communication barriers.
Yeah, so they would need to find translators or find people to be able to participate. So then you're not just having to walk one person through the process, you're having to walk the translator and or the support worker.
And even with the sign language interpreter, there are difficulties because things like terms such as hangover or blackout don't have specific signs. So that can be a lot of confusion and frustration for people when they're trying to obtain treatment.
So a jargon or slang words or technical terms don't translate.
Not always.
Yeah, okay, I could see that where that would be extremely difficult. In my work, I do it every day, and I talk about it in those words. I think I say the word blackout every day.
Yeah,
All right.
Yeah, and I mean, for someone who's decided to take the courageous step and go for help, and then they're met with those kinds of barriers, you can imagine how that would impact them.
Oh yeah, I mean because there's usually emotional barriers. The previous person on the show was talking about the feeling of abandonment or feeling like being left out and not being inclusive, and being able to say, you know what, if I'm already suffering from not feeling included or not being able to be participating, and then when I seek help and I find more barriers, wow, does that ever feel like a punch in the gut, huh?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you think about someone who has a physical disability and they're wanting to go into residential treatment, well, the first thing that comes to mind is, do they have access to personal support workers
Yeah.
to help them with their daily needs, such
Yeah.
as bathing, showering, dressing? Oftentimes not.
Right.
And that's been shown in my research, too,
And-
that very limited resources are available in those areas.
Yeah. So what are there any suggestions or ideas, or what people might be able to do in that regard to find personal support? Because we already know that there's huge barriers to residential care because of cost, because of time, because of
Right.
whatever. That's just for an individual. Trying to
Right.
factor in the cost of another person participating is a big barrier. Are there any things on the horizon or anything that you see that's helping with
Well,
that?
I think what's starting to happen is a lot of cross-training in education among people in the disability and addiction fields.
Yeah.
So they're no longer working in silos. So we have more cross-training with people from both the addiction and disability fields, which helps because they can work together to sort of break down the barriers and explain sort of what's needed on both sides.
Right. Yeah, I see the value in that too, and we're also in a place right now where there's so many areas that a professional can learn and grow in,
Right.
and a lot of companies. I've worked for some in the past where coming up with training dollars or being able to get people into those places is even more difficult. So you're like, hey, we want to, because the professionals I know, they want all the skills, they want to know all the stuff, but then
Yeah.
it's like, who's paying for this extra training?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that can be difficult. But what's great is there's now research coming out that shows the value of cross-training in education, which hopefully that can be justified in terms of funding when people are trying to access funding.
That would be wonderful. I want a piece of that for
And
sure.
that was a big issue in a lot of my research.
Okay.
When we talk about resources, is the funding and the fact that people just don't have it to provide whatever it may be, sign language interpreter, personal support workers.
Right.
That was a big issue.
Has your research shown any change in that over time? Because I would guess that 20 years ago it would be even worse, right? Are we moving in the right direction? Is what I want to know.
We are moving in the right direction. So it's showing actually that more people are talking about this issue, and that the fact is that people with disabilities are the largest minority group in the world, yet their treatment participation is lower, and we see that rates of addiction among this group are 50% or higher than in the general population. So people now are starting to talk about that.
Wow, 50%.
Yeah.
That's a statistic I didn't know.
Yeah.
So there's certainly a need in there. And then when you're looking at the largest demographic,
Absolutely.
wow. I can't wait for your book to come out. I ordered a
Yeah.
copy,
Oh,
an advanced
great.
copy this week for it to
Great.
come. And I'm sure that I have lots of learning to do. Always learning and growing in that as well. So if you were to give some advice to professionals or people who work in the field, even people in the 12-step world, right?
Yeah.
If we were going to give them some advice, what would that look like for saying, how are you going to, contribute, or how can you make this
Yeah.
easier? What can we do?
So the first thing I would say is, at the very beginning, just listen. Just listen. And if you don't know, if you don't have the answer, that's okay. It's better to say you don't have the answer, because lots of times people with disabilities are used to working around barriers. And so we have a lot of the answers already. We just need a vehicle to get where we need to go.
Right. Just listening and then being able to ask the questions and being able to just inquire in a healthy way.
Right.
I think I can note seeing people sometimes struggling with being able to ask people
Right.
questions around their disabilities because they feel awkward or uncomfortable, or they may ask the wrong question or use a politically incorrect term or those sort of things.
Yeah.
So how would one work towards being able to, or is there anything that you can think of that you could suggest would make it easier to ask those questions, or anything to avoid?
Yeah, I would just say just put the person you're working with, as you always do, in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions that come up, just ask.
Right.
We're used to all types of questions.
Right.
So we're no stranger to any questions that you might have.
There's something that I hear in the field, and they say, treat the person like they're the expert of their own life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because people with disabilities, I use we because I have a physical disability as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've had to navigate so many barriers that we have become experts. And lots of times we just need someone alongside us to direct us and point us the right way.
Of course. If you can give one quick word of advice to a person with disabilities suffering with substance use, what advice would it be?
Don't be afraid to ask for help, as people are always willing to help you. Just don't be afraid.
I love it. Christa, who was a previous guest, said the exact same thing. So I like that you two are in sync, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome.
Melissa, I look forward to reading your chapter in the book. I read the previous versions of it, and I love it, so I can't wait to see your version of it. Thank you again for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Okay. We'll be right back after this break. To be invisible is part of addiction, even more so part of physical disabilities. As we heard today on the show, we had people looking at all the barriers that they have to access, to get out of the house, to participate. And those barriers also contribute to emotional, physical, attitudinal. There's all of these things that get in the way. And we heard it twice at the end of each segment to reach out for help. So now you're going to hear it for a third time. When it comes to addiction, reaching out for help is the most important thing. If you're suffering from a physical disability or some barriers that are in your way that are preventing you from getting care, please reach out for help. And thank you for watching Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction.